Hi everyone, you're listening to the Breaking Strings podcast. Thanks for joining me. This is episode 22, and if you've listened to the podcast long enough, or if you've listened to at least half an episode, you know that I'm very much about efficiency in practicing your instrument. There are going to be some areas that musicians commonly overlook when they're practicing, and this can happen at any stage, whether you're an amateur, you're a student, or even a professional. You can just forget to look at a certain couple of areas. This might hold you back if you do this. Today I'm going to talk about how to build a well-rounded practice routine, and I'm going to include 4 components that you really might want to look at. And these 4 components should stay with you for the rest of your life. It doesn't matter what your level is. As musicians, we can get completely consumed just with our repertoire, the pieces that we're learning. The music, of course, is the whole reason that we keep the instrument in our lives. We love the music. We take the instrument out of the case just for the music. We put up with all of the, difficulties of having a musical instrument in your life just to play the pieces that we love. But this cannot be the only thing in our practice routine. If we overlook some areas that need to be worked on in the background, we're going to keep ourselves from being the best that we can be. So today I'm going to talk about the vital components of a good practice routine. I'm going to just talk about 4. Of course, there are more than 4 that I want to cover in separate episodes, but let me just give you 4 to kind of meditate on after this episode so that hopefully you can see some improvement immediately. So let's touch on warm-ups, technical exercises, sight reading, and critical listening of recordings. First, the warm-ups. Is there a difference between a warm-up or a technical routine? A lot of people don't think there is, because I do get a lot of emails from students asking, hey, what's a good exercise for stretching capacity, for speed, for accuracy? How can I develop my strength endurance on the instrument? Can you give me some warm-ups for that? The thing is that those are all great things to work on. Those are all very necessary things for us to work on, but those are all part of a technical routine. Those are not part of our warm-up routine. There is some overlap between warm-up exercises and technical exercises, but the point is that their purpose is completely different, and the way you carry out a warm-up routine is going to be different from the way you carry out a technical routine. The purpose of an extensive technical routine is to push your hands into new heights. So you're going to go out of your comfort zone. You're going to play a little bit faster than you've ever played before. You're going to probably work on endurance in a way that fatigues your fingers quite a bit. You're going to get tired. You don't want to do any of this with a warm-up routine. Warm-ups prepare your muscles. If you're a singer, you're going to prepare your vocal cords. The purpose of warming up is just that, to warm up and wake up the body with light movements. Warm-ups should not fatigue you, and they should not really stress you out. When I do a warm-up, I do that at the beginning of a practice session or before a performance. With a technical routine, I actually like to put it at the end, because if I'm pushing my body or pushing my hands into new areas and I will see some fatigue after that, I don't want to practice my pieces right after that, because I'm not going to feel great when I do that. If I'm very fatigued, the practicing will suffer, and if I'm very fatigued, the performance will suffer as well. Another important difference is that warm-ups can be done every single day because they're really light, and I recommend that they last about 5 to 12 minutes. And technical exercises, technical routines, you should really take it easy. You probably might want to schedule them every other day at most. I've found that if I work on the same technical exercises intensely day after day, my hands just kind of feel sore and I don't feel good. My hands start to feel a little bit heavier and I'm not executing my repertoire as well. Well, that's not good, because the whole point of these warm-ups and technical exercises is actually to save you time when you're working on your repertoire. And now if you're sacrificing the quality of your repertoire, that's not good. While neither technical exercises or warm-ups should be a completely mindless process, I think that technical exercises should be a little bit more mentally fatiguing and mentally intensive than warm-ups. Warm-ups should be started off very, very light. You should be touching the instrument with the minimal amount of tension, getting yourself ready to play like that for the rest of your practice session, just constantly cultivating that feeling of relaxation. Since you're not leafing through a big binder of exercises when you're doing your warm-ups, have a couple of exercises between 2 and 5, I would say, to keep in your warm-up routine. The warm-up routine should make you feel good. It should make you feel prepared and ready. You don't want to lower your confidence before a performance. That's definitely going to steer you in the wrong path mentally before you perform and even before you practice. With technical exercises, you should probably devote about 30 minutes to focus on things like scales, arpeggios, legatos, and these are just coming from me as a classical guitarist. It's going to be a little bit different from instrument to instrument. The goal of that technical routine is to not add time to your practice session, but to practice less. You're probably thinking, can't we just use our music to work on technique? Can't we just use our pieces? Your technical exercises are being derived from the pieces that you play. So you're working on the weakest links in the repertoire that you're currently playing. Sometimes you might have a tricky spot in a piece, and it might only last half a second or maybe 3 seconds, but you stumble in that area every time you practice the piece or every time you play the piece. Since that spot is so small and it doesn't last for a long time in the piece of music, if you isolate it separately, you can get more volume and repetition in. If it's an issue of endurance, this will particularly be helpful because you're not going to be able to work on endurance as much if that bit is very, very short. Sometimes you don't have the physical endurance to do something that lasts like 3 or 4 seconds that happens in the piece, but you're also not getting enough volume and repetition by playing it just when it occurs in the piece of music. Sometimes you need to loop it for a little while. That might help you overcome that endurance problem. Here's another thought about working on your technique purely from the pieces. If you put that same volume and repetition into just playing the pieces of music that you have, you might get burned out on them. That's not good. You want to have a good ratio between how much you still love the piece, how much it still interests you, and where it's at in the completion process. If a piece is like 25% complete and you already hate it, that's not a good position to be in. What's going to happen is you're probably going to drop that piece and you're going to have to move on to something else just to stay motivated and encouraged while you're practicing. And then you're going to move from one unfinished product to the next, and then you don't actually have a portfolio. You don't have a repertoire because you've got a lot of unfinished projects. Next, I want to jump into sight reading. I'll be honest with you, coming from the self-taught background into the formal training, music reading was not fun. It was a very slow process for me. First, I had to really learn the guitar fretboard really well, and then all of the stuff that would appear on the music, it would be so foreign to me. I would know the notes and I would roughly know their locations, but then it's like, but there's so many different possibilities for how to place the fingers and what's the best way to play this and what's the best way to execute this on which area of the guitar. Is this better on the lower part of the fretboard, middle part of the fretboard? Sometimes you move a little bit higher on the fretboard. All of that would take so much time that learning a single line of music in the very beginning, it was just so stressful. It would take like an hour just to get a single line of music going. When I started sight reading, I luckily did it the right way. I took pieces that were about 50 or 60% of the difficulty of the current working repertoire that I had. And what I would do is play those pieces under the concert tempo, just a little bit under the intended concert tempo, but I would play it straight through and react to everything in real time. Here's an important point about reading music. When we actually have pieces that are in our repertoire, we're seeing that music on a daily basis, and we might be making revisions. We have a lot of time, days and weeks, to react to the fingering and make a final decision about the way that we want to execute it. Sight reading gives you none of that. You have to respond immediately. It teaches you to make very fast decisions. That kind of rapid decision making is very powerful, and it's actually going to help you in the long run of learning your pieces. You're going to be much faster at learning your repertoire if you're a good sight reader. When I was finally able to get my sight reading to a higher level, I was able to get a skeleton of the way that the piece is going to sound on the very first day of opening the sheet music. This is nice because now I'm remembering to the beginning stages of like my first formal training. Learning something line by line, that was really difficult because it would be so long before I could actually hear myself playing the performance of the music. It's so much nicer these days where I open the sheet music, and in the beginning it might be a little rough, it might be a little sloppy, but I'm already able to execute the entire piece. I have the framework set for the entire piece, and I can start thinking in much larger terms. I can start thinking about everything with the interpretation to the final tempo that I want. A lot of decisions are going to be made in the early stages, and the completed product, the completed piece, it's going to happen much sooner for me now with the improved sight reading. Let's move into the last area of concern for today, critical listening and comparative listening. This has been a huge game changer for me personally. I said in the last episode, when you're listening to music, don't just listen passively. Don't just listen in the background. Listen very carefully as if it's a university course that you're attending. With comparative listening, you want to take the recording of at least 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 different artists playing the same piece of music. It doesn't have to be the instrument that you play. You could be a guitarist and you could be listening to a piano recording, or you could be a pianist and you're listening to a violin recording. The point is that you're going to listen to this set of recordings and you're going to have this score on your computer screen or your iPad, or you're going to have it on paper. And you're going to make notes about the specificities of every single performance that you hear. That's why I said it's good to have a minimum of 2, obviously, for comparison, but probably no more than 4. If you start listening to way too many recordings, you're going to get bombarded and you're probably going to get lost. So with these recordings now, you're making notes, and you want to have a good assessment of which recording moved you the most, which one spoke to you the most. If you don't have a really trained ear, like in the beginning, all of the recordings are going to sound good to you. But do your best to at least make a distinction between those recordings. It could be something simple. It could be like the difference in the tempo. But don't just write that there was a difference in the tempo between 2 recordings. Think carefully about the effect that the difference in the tempo had. What did the slower tempo do? What did the slightly faster tempo do? With comparative listening, you're building your own personal palette for interpretation. The most dangerous place to be in when you're a musician is to play something and then listen back to your own recording and then have no idea what you want to fix. Now, a more difficult place to be in, but a far better place for your own development, is to be in a place where you listen to your own recording and you hate everything that you hear. You hear all of the details that you want to bring out and they're not coming through on that recording. I admit, it's a difficult place to be in. It would be great to just listen and be sort of carefree and say, oh, wow, yeah, I loved the way that I played it. Yeah, that's fine, but that means that your ear is behind. Your ear is not ahead of your hands, and you want to always train your ear to be far ahead of what your technique is able to do. If you're in a place like that, as hard as it may be, one last time I'm going to mention, I admit it is very hard to listen to a recording of your own playing and not like a lot of the stuff that you're hearing. I admit it. But look, you can be your own teacher when you do this, because if your ears are far ahead of what your technique is able to do, well, you know what you need to work on. You know how to start to make a list of the things that you want to improve. You don't even have to know how to get there in all of those cases. You don't even need to know immediately how to solve all those problems. You just need to hear that they're there. That is a very valuable place to start. All right, guys, that's the end of the episode for today. I hope some of the things I talked about on the podcast were an inspiration for you to perhaps pick up the instrument tomorrow and try something new. If some of the areas that I talked about were not an area that you're currently working on so much, give it a try. I guarantee that you're going to see some really good long-term results. As always, thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.